The morning started the same way it always did in Arrow Village. The sun climbed into the sky, spreading its golden light across the small houses and dusty streets. Roosters crowed, children chased each other with laughter, and the marketplace began to buzz with life. Vendors called out to anyone who passed by, offering everything from fresh vegetables to colorful fabrics. And then there was Mama Beezy, the bread seller everyone loved. Mama Beezy's bread was famous in the village. She carried her tray of golden brown loaves balanced perfectly on her head. The smell of freshly baked bread followed her everywhere, making people stop whatever they were doing to buy a loaf. It wasn't just bread. It was soft, warm, and somehow made you feel happy just by eating it. At least that's what everyone thought. But not Cunnel's dog, Toby. Every morning, without fail, the moment Mama Beezy passed Cunnel's workshop, Toby would start barking like mad. He'd growl and snarl, pulling at the rope that tied him to a wooden post near the door. His barks were so loud they drowned out the sound of hammering and sawing that came from inside. "Ah, Toby, what is it again today?" Cunnel shouted, coming out of the workshop, wiping sawdust off his hands. He looked at the dog, then at Mama Beezy, who was just passing by with her usual tray of bread. She gave Cunnel a smile and waved. "Good morning, Cunnel," she said cheerfully, her voice as warm as the bread she sold. "Your dog doesn't like me." "Oh, maybe I should give him a loaf to keep quiet." Cunnel chuckled awkwardly. "It's not you, Mama Beezy. He's just restless. You know how dogs can be." Mama Beezy nodded, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She hurried past, calling out to other customers as she went. Cunnel crouched down and patted Toby's head. "What's your problem, boy? She's just selling bread. You can't bark at her every day." Toby's ears flattened, but he kept growling, his sharp eyes following Mama Beezy until she disappeared into the distance. Later that day, Cunnel went to the market to buy nails for his next carpentry project. As he walked through the crowded stalls, he noticed Mama Beezy's bread stall was busier than usual. A small crowd had gathered, all smiling and chatting as they bought her bread. She laughed as she handed out loaves, her tray nearly empty already. "Mama Beezy, your bread is always sweet," said one of the customers, a woman carrying a baby on her back. "Ah, thank you, my dear," Mama Beezy replied. "It's the love I put into it." Cunnel bought his nails and stopped by to greet her. "Business is good, I see," he said, eyeing the crowd. "God has been faithful," Mama Beezy said, smiling. But Cunnel noticed something strange. Her hands, which were usually steady, were trembling slightly as she packed the bread. Her eyes darted around nervously, as if she was afraid someone might be watching her. Cunnel frowned. "Mama Beezy, are you all right? You look tired." She shook her head quickly. "Ah, I'm fine, Cunnel. Just busy. You know how it is." Cunnel nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He decided to let it go for now and went back to his workshop. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the village grew quiet, Cunnel sat outside his workshop, sipping palm wine and stroking Toby's fur. The dog was calmer now, his tail wagging slightly as Cunnel scratched behind his ears. But Cunnel's mind was restless. "Toby, you're always barking at Mama Beezy," he said aloud, even though he knew the dog couldn't answer. "What do you see that I don't?" As if he understood, Toby let out a low growl and stared into the distance where Mama Beezy's house was. Cunnel's curiosity grew stronger. Something wasn't adding up. Why was his dog so agitated around her? And why had she seemed so nervous earlier? Cunnel decided he needed answers. He'd start by talking to someone who knew more about strange things than he did. The next morning, Cunnel paid a visit to Baba Ojo, the village's herbalist and spiritual guide. Baba Ojo was sitting outside his small hut, grinding herbs in a mortar. His long gray beard swayed as he worked, and his wrinkled face lit up when he saw Cunnel approaching. "Ah, Cunnel, my son, what brings you here so early?" Baba Ojo asked, motioning for him to sit on a wooden stool. Cunnel sat and explained everything. Toby's barking, Mama Beezy's nervous behavior, and the strange feeling he'd had in the market. Baba Ojo listened quietly, his hands resting on the mortar. When Cunnel finished, the old man nodded slowly. Dogs have sharp senses, sharper than humans. If your Toby is barking at her every day, there is something he can see that you cannot. Cunnel leaned forward. But what could it be, Baba? Mama Beezy is kind. She's been selling bread here for years. Why would Toby act like this now? Baba Ojo stroked his beard thoughtfully. Sometimes good people are pushed to do bad things. Desperation can lead even the best of us down dark paths. You must watch carefully, Cunnel. Keep your eyes open and trust your instincts. And your dog's instincts, too. Cunnel nodded, though his mind was racing. He thanked Baba Ojo and headed back to his workshop, determined to find out the truth. The next few days, Cunnel kept a close eye on Mama Beezy. He noticed little things he hadn't before. She always seemed to avoid dogs, crossing the street if she saw one ahead. Her hands shook whenever someone asked her about her bread recipe. And then there was the way her eyes darted around, like she was waiting for something bad to happen. Finally, one morning, Cunnel decided to test his theory. He bought a loaf of bread from Mama Beezy and brought it back to his workshop. Toby's reaction was immediate. The dog growled and barked at the loaf as if it were alive. Cunnel held the bread closer, and Toby lunged, snapping his teeth at it. All right, Cunnel said, pulling the bread away. He stared at the loaf in his hands, his heart pounding. What's inside this bread, Mama Beezy? He didn't have an answer yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Something wasn't right, and he was going to find out what it was, no matter what. Cunnel couldn't sleep that night. His mind raced with thoughts about the loaf of bread and Toby's reaction to it. He sat on the wooden stool outside his workshop, staring into the dark, the loaf resting on the table beside him. Toby lay at his feet, still growling softly whenever his eyes flicked toward the bread. What is it about this bread, boy? Cunnel muttered, running his hands through his hair. Is it poisoned? Cursed? Something else? Toby whined and nudged Cunnel's leg with his nose as if urging him to act. Cunnel decided he couldn't handle this on his own anymore. He needed someone who could help. The first person who came to mind was Amaka, his childhood friend and someone who always had a knack for figuring things out. She lived a short walk away, so he quickly wrapped the bread in a cloth, tied it up, and set off with Toby trotting beside him. Amaka's house was small but neat, with potted plants lining the front porch. She was just stepping outside to fetch water when she saw Cunnel approaching. Cunnel, what are you doing here at this time? Amaka asked, balancing the bucket on her hip. Her tone was surprised but warm. Cunnel held up the cloth bundle. I need your help. It's about Mama Beezy's bread. Amaka frowned. Mama Beezy? What about her bread? Cunnel glanced around nervously, then said, Can we go inside? This is not something I want everyone to hear. Amaka's curiosity was piqued. She nodded and led him into the small sitting room. Toby stayed by the door, lying down but keeping his eyes fixed on Cunnel. Once they were inside, Cunnel unwrapped the bread and placed it on the table. Toby's been acting strange around her bread. He barks every time she comes near, and today he nearly tore this loaf apart. I'm starting to think there's something wrong with it, Cunnel explained. Amaka raised an eyebrow. Something wrong? Like what? Cunnel shook his head. I don't know, but I can't shake the feeling that this bread is not normal. Can you help me figure it out? Amaka stared at the loaf, her face serious. Then she reached out and picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It looks normal to me, she said, breaking off a small piece and sniffing it. Smells normal too. But if you're this worried, we can test it. Cunnel's heart raced. How do we do that? Amaka smiled faintly. I've been learning a bit about herbs and charms from Baba Ojo. I've seen him test things like this before. Let me grab my kit. She disappeared into a back room and returned a few moments later with a small wooden box. Inside were several tiny bottles, each filled with powders and liquids, and a bundle of dried leaves. Amaka set the box on the table and got to work. Amaka sprinkled a bit of powder onto the bread and waited. Nothing happened. She poured a few drops of liquid onto another piece, watching it closely. Still, nothing changed. Cunnel's shoulders slumped. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, he said, shaking his head. Maybe Toby's just being Toby. Amaka didn't answer immediately. She picked up one of the dried leaves, muttered something under her breath, and held it over the bread. Suddenly, the leaf turned black at the edges and crumbled to ash in her hand. Kunnal's eyes widened. What does that mean? Amaka's voice was low. It means there's something in this bread. Something not natural. Kunnal's heart pounded. What do we do now? Amaka looked at him, her expression serious. We need to talk to Baba Ojo. If anyone can tell us what's going on, it's him. The next morning, Kunnal and Amaka went to Baba Ojo's hut. The old man was sitting outside, as he often did, grinding herbs with his mortar and pestle. He looked up as they approached, his sharp eyes immediately noticing the tension between them. Kunnal, Amaka, what brings you here so early? He asked, setting the mortar aside. Kunnal explained everything, from Toby's barking to the strange reaction of the leaf. He placed the wrapped loaf of bread on the ground in front of Baba Ojo, who frowned deeply as he listened. When Kunnal finished, Baba Ojo picked up the bread and studied it carefully. He sniffed it, broke off a small piece, and rolled it between his fingers. Then he closed his eyes and muttered a prayer under his breath. After a long silence, Baba Ojo opened his eyes and looked at them gravely. This bread is cursed. Kunnal felt his stomach drop. Cursed? How? Why? Baba Ojo shook his head. I don't know the full story yet, but there is dark magic in this bread. Whoever eats it is giving up something precious. Amaka's voice was barely above a whisper. Like what? Their essence, Baba Ojo replied. Their energy, their dreams, their luck. This bread is stealing from them and giving it to someone else. Kunnal felt a chill run down his spine. Mama Beezy. She's taking from the village? Isn't she? Baba Ojo nodded slowly. It seems so, but I don't think she's doing it out of malice. There's something more to this. We need to find out what. That evening, Kunnal and Amaka decided to watch Mama Beezy. They found a spot near her house where they could stay hidden but still see everything. As the sun set, Mama Beezy came out with her tray, preparing for another day of selling bread. But before she left, she did something that made Kunnal's breath catch in his throat. She walked to a corner of her yard where a small, makeshift altar was hidden. On it were strange objects, cowries, feathers, and a small wooden figurine. Mama Beezy knelt in front of the altar, muttering words they couldn't hear. Amaka's hand tightened on Kunnal's arm. She's using charms, she whispered. Kunnal nodded, his heart pounding. They watched as Mama Beezy placed a loaf of bread on the altar, poured a liquid over it, and whispered again. Then she stood, wiped her eyes, and walked away with the tray. Kunnal turned to Amaka. We need to stop this. Amaka hesitated. Not yet. We need to know why she's doing this. Let's talk to her. Kunnal nodded reluctantly. All right, but we have to be careful. Together, they set off, determined to uncover the truth. Kunnal and Amaka stood in the shadows of the large tree near Mama Beezy's house, their breaths shallow. The quiet hum of the night surrounded them as they watched her disappear down the dusty path, her tray of bread balanced on her head. Neither of them spoke for a moment, both trying to process what they had just witnessed. Kunnal, did you see the way she knelt there? Amaka whispered, her voice barely audible. She was talking to something. What was that thing on the altar? Kunnal rubbed his hands together nervously. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not ordinary. He paused, glancing at Amaka. What do we do now? Do we confront her? Amaka shook her head quickly. No, not yet. If we go now, she might deny everything. We need more proof. Something solid. Proof? Kunnal's voice was tense. We just saw her perform some kind of ritual. What more proof do we need? Amaka placed a calming hand on his arm. Kunnal, I understand you're upset. I am too. But think about it, if we accuse her without evidence, people might not believe us. You know how much the village loves her bread. Kunnal sighed heavily. All right, but how do we get more proof? We can't just follow her around all day. Amaka's eyes lit up with determination. We'll figure it out. But first, let's talk to Baba Ojo again. He might know what those objects on the altar mean. He can help us understand what's really going on. Kunnal nodded, though his stomach churned with unease. Let's go first thing in the morning. The next morning, the pair arrived at Baba Ojo's hut just as the sun was rising. The old man was already awake, sitting cross-legged outside and sipping a cup of herbal tea. He looked up as they approached, his wise eyes narrowing slightly. "You're back," Baba Ojo said, setting his cup down. "And from the look on your faces, I'd say you've seen something troubling." Kunnal and Amaka exchanged a glance before Kunnal stepped forward. "Baba, we watched Mama Beezy last night. She has an altar in her yard. We saw her kneeling in front of it and speaking to something. She poured something over a loaf of bread and it just didn't feel right." Baba Ojo's expression grew serious. "Describe the altar to me." Amaka took a deep breath. There were cowries, feathers, and a small wooden figurine. She placed the bread on the altar and whispered something we couldn't hear. Then she poured some kind of liquid over it. The old man's face darkened. "That's no ordinary altar. What you saw is a shrine used for siphoning energy. The figurine represents the spirit she's working with. The cowries and feathers are offerings. The liquid she poured is likely a binding agent to seal the connection between the bread and her customers." Kunnal's eyes widened. "So she's using the bread to take from people, like you said before?" Baba Ojo nodded solemnly. "Yes, she's drawing energy from those who eat the bread. Their vitality, their luck, their joy, all of it is being transferred to her. That's why her business is so successful, and why others in the village are struggling without realizing why." Amaka's voice trembled with anger. "How could she do this? People trust her. They love her." Baba Ojo's gaze softened. "Desperation makes people do things they would never imagine. She must have been driven to this for a reason. The question is, who taught her this? And why did she think it was her only choice?" Kunnal clenched his fists. "We have to stop her, Baba. How do we break the curse?" Baba Ojo leaned back, stroking his beard. "It won't be easy. First, you must confront her and get her to confess. Only she knows the full extent of the spell she's using. Then, we can perform a ritual to cleanse the village and restore what's been taken." Amaka's jaw tightened. "What if she refuses to confess?" The old man's eyes were sharp. "Then the truth will have to be revealed another way. But be careful. If she feels cornered, she might lash out. You must approach her with caution." Kunnal nodded, determination burning in his chest. "We'll talk to her tonight." That evening, Kunnal and Amaka waited near Mama Beezy's house again. This time, they didn't hide. As she stepped outside with her tray of bread, they walked up to her. "Kunnal? Amaka? What are you two doing here?" Mama Beezy asked, her voice cheerful but tinged with surprise. Kunnal forced a smile. "Mama Beezy, we need to talk to you. It's important." Her smile faltered. "Talk about what?" Amaka stepped forward. "We know about the altar in your yard. We saw you last night. Please just tell us the truth. Why are you doing this?" Mama Beezy's face went pale. She took a step back, clutching the tray tightly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking. Kunnal's voice was gentle but firm. "Mama Beezy, please. We're not here to hurt you or make trouble. We just want to understand. If you tell us the truth, we can help you." Tears filled her eyes as she shook her head. "You don't understand. I had no choice. I did it for my children. If I stopped now, everything would fall apart." Amaka reached out, her voice soft. "Mama Beezy, we can help you. Whatever it is, we'll find a way to fix it. But you have to trust us. Please." Mama Beezy looked at them, her eyes filled with pain and fear. Finally, she whispered, "Come inside." Inside her small home, Mama Beezy placed the tray on the table and sank into a chair, her hands trembling. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "It started 2 years ago," she said. "My husband died suddenly, and I was left alone with my 3 children. I tried everything to make ends meet, but no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. We were starving." Her voice broke, and she wiped her eyes. "One day, a man came to me. He said he could help. He gave me the figurine and taught me how to use it. He said it would bring me success, that I'd never have to worry about money again. I didn't understand what it really meant. I just wanted to feed my children. Cunnel's heart ached as he listened. Who was this man? Mama Beezy shook her head. I don't know his name. He came from another village. He said he was a spiritualist. First, everything seemed fine. People loved my bread, and we had enough to eat. But then, I started noticing the changes in the people who bought from me. They grew tired, unhappy. I wanted to stop, but the man, he came back. He said if I stopped, something terrible would happen to my children. Amaka's voice was filled with quiet anger. He's been using you, Mama Beezy. He's the one behind all this. Mama Beezy nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, but what can I do? If I stop, my children, I can't lose them too. Cunnel reached out and took her hand. You're not alone, Mama Beezy. We'll help you. Baba Ojo knows how to break the curse. But you have to trust us. She looked at him, her eyes full of fear and hope. Finally, she nodded. All right, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Mama Beezy, do you still have the figurine and the oil he gave you? Yes, Mama Beezy said, her voice barely a whisper. They're hidden under my bed. I was too afraid to get rid of them. We need to take them to Baba Ojo, Amaka said firmly. He'll know how to destroy them and break the curse. Mama Beezy looked hesitant. What if the man comes back? Cunnel's voice was steady. Then we'll be ready. He's been hiding in the shadows for too long. It's time we brought him into the light. Later that night, the three of them arrived at Baba Ojo's hut with the figurine and the oil. Baba Ojo's face grew grim as he examined the items. The figurine was small and carved from dark wood, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The oil was in a small glass bottle, its contents shimmering unnaturally in the dim light. This is powerful magic, Baba Ojo said, his voice heavy. Whoever gave this to you knows what they're doing. Breaking this curse won't be easy, but it can be done. What do we need to do? Cunnel asked, his voice firm. Baba Ojo looked at Mama Beezy. You must be the one to destroy these items. The curse is tied to you. If anyone else tries, it could backfire and hurt the entire village. Mama Beezy's eyes widened. But how do I destroy them? Baba Ojo began to gather materials from around his hut. We'll perform a cleansing ritual. You'll need to burn the figurine and pour the oil over the fire to break its power. But it won't be easy. The spirit tied to these items won't let go without a fight. Cunnel's hand tightened into a fist. We'll protect her. Whatever happens, we won't let her face this alone. Amaka nodded, her voice steady. We're in this together. The next evening, they gathered in the clearing behind Baba Ojo's hut. A small fire crackled in the center, its flames dancing in the night. Baba Ojo stood on one side, holding a bundle of herbs. Cunnel, Amaka, and Mama Beezy stood nearby, the figurine and oil resting on a cloth in front of them. Are you ready? Baba Ojo asked, looking at Mama Beezy. She nodded, though her hands trembled. I'm ready. Baba Ojo began to chant, his deep voice filling the air with a strange, rhythmic melody. The fire flared brighter as he tossed the herbs into the flames. He motioned for Mama Beezy to step forward. Place the figurine in the fire, he instructed. Mama Beezy hesitated, her hands shaking as she picked up the figurine. Cunnel stepped closer, his voice soft. You can do this, Mama Beezy. We're here with you. She nodded and took a deep breath. Then, with trembling hands, she placed the figurine into the flames. The fire roared to life, the flames turning a deep shade of blue. A low, eerie howl filled the air, sending chills down their spines. Now the oil, Baba Ojo said, his voice steady. Mama Beezy picked up the bottle, her fingers slipping on the glass. Amaka quickly steadied her hand. It's okay, just pour it in. With a shaky breath, Mama Beezy uncorked the bottle and poured the shimmering liquid over the fire. The flames hissed and roared, the eerie howl growing louder. Then, suddenly, the fire exploded into a blinding light, forcing them all to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the fire had returned to its normal color. The figurine was gone, reduced to ash. The air felt lighter, as though a heavy weight had been lifted. Baba Ojo smiled faintly. It is done. The curse is broken. Mama Beezy fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for helping me. Kunnel and Amaka knelt beside her, their arms around her shoulders. You did it, Mama Beezy, Kunnel said softly. You were brave. As they helped her to her feet, Baba Ojo's expression grew serious. The man who gave you this will know the curse is broken. Be careful. He may come looking for you. Kunnel's eyes narrowed. If he comes, we'll be ready. The next morning, the village began to feel different. The air was fresher, the people more cheerful. Mama Beezy's customers, who had been tired and sad, seemed to regain their energy. It was as though a dark cloud had been lifted from Arrow Village. But Kunnel, Amaka, and Baba Ojo knew the battle wasn't over. The helper was still out there, and they had a feeling he wouldn't let this go easily. Still, for the first time in a long while, they felt hope. Together, they had faced the darkness and won. And together, they would be ready for whatever came next. The day after the ritual, Kunnel, Amaka, and Mama Beezy sat together in Kunnel's workshop. The air was still, but a quiet tension hung between them. Toby, Kunnel's loyal dog, lay at his usual spot near the door. His ears perked up as though he too was waiting for something to happen. So, what now? Kunnel finally asked, breaking the silence. He leaned back in his chair, the lines on his forehead showing his concern. Baba Ojo said, that man, the one who gave you the figurine, will know the curse is broken. What do we do if he comes? Mama Beezy shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her hands clutched the edges of her wrapper, and she looked down at the ground. I don't know. I don't even know who he really is. He never told me his name. He just appeared one day and offered to help. I didn't know it would turn into all this. Amaka placed a reassuring hand on Mama Beezy's shoulder. It's not your fault, she said softly. You were trying to survive to protect your children. But now we have to focus on what comes next. We can't let this man hurt anyone else. Kunnel nodded, his jaw tightening. You're right. We need a plan. We can't just sit here waiting for him to show up. Amaka frowned, her mind clearly working through the possibilities. Do you think Baba Ojo might know more about this man? Maybe he's heard of him before. That's a good idea, Kunnel said. Let's go back to him and see if he has any advice. If this man is as powerful as he seems, we'll need all the help we can get. Later that afternoon, the three of them arrived at Baba Ojo's hut. The old man was sitting outside, as usual, grinding herbs in his mortar. When he saw them approach, he put the mortar down and stood up, his sharp eyes immediately noticing their worried expressions. You're back, he said, motioning for them to sit. I take it you're worried about the man who gave Mama Beezy the figurine? Kunnel nodded. Baba, we need to know more about him. Who is he? What does he want? And how do we stop him if he comes back? Baba Ojo's face grew serious. He stroked his long beard as he spoke. Men like him are not easy to deal with. They are spiritualists who use their knowledge of charms and magic to exploit others. They feed on desperation, offering help that comes with a hidden price. They thrive on fear and secrecy. Mama Beezy shuddered. He said if I stopped doing what he asked, something terrible would happen to my children. Do you think Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Baba Ojo held up a hand to calm her. Now that the figurine and the oil are destroyed, his direct connection to you is gone. But that doesn't mean he won't come looking for you. Men like him hate losing control. So what do we do? Kunnel asked. Baba Ojo stood and began gathering materials from inside his hut. We prepare. If he comes, we must be ready to face him. I'll create protective charms for all of you. They will keep you safe and shield you from his influence. But you must also be strong in your hearts. Fear gives him power. If you're afraid, he will use it against you. Amaka's voice was firm. We're not afraid. We just want to protect the village and make sure no one else gets hurt. Baba Ojo nodded approvingly. Good. Then let's get to work. For the rest of the afternoon, Baba Ojo taught them how to prepare for the confrontation. He gave them charms to wear around their necks and showed them how to create a protective circle if the man appeared. He also warned them to stay vigilant and not let their guard down. As the sun began to set, Kunnal, Amaka, and Mama Beezy returned to the village. They decided to stay at Mama Beezy's house that night, in case the man came looking for her. Toby lay by the door, his ears twitching at every sound. "Do you think he'll come tonight?" Mama Beezy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kunnal shook his head. "I don't know, but if he does, we'll be ready." Amaka glanced out the window, her eyes scanning the dark street. "Let's take turns keeping watch. We can't let him catch us off guard." They agreed, and Kunnal took the first shift. He sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the street outside, while Toby lay at his feet. The hours passed slowly, the quiet of the night broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a night bird. Just as Kunnal was starting to feel the weight of sleep pressing down on him, Toby's ears shot up. The dog let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside. "What is it, boy?" Kunnal whispered, his heart pounding. He peered out the window but saw nothing. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. The man was tall and thin, dressed in a long robe that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. His face was partially hidden by a hood, but his presence radiated power and menace. Kunnal's breath caught in his throat. "He's here," he whispered, shaking Amaka awake. "Wake Mama Beezy. He's here." Amaka sat up immediately, her eyes wide. She shook Mama Beezy, who woke with a start. What's happening?" "He's outside," Kunnal said, his voice tense. "Stay quiet and follow the plan." The three of them quickly moved to the center of the room, where they had drawn a protective circle earlier. They held hands, their charms glowing faintly in the dim light. Toby stood by the door, his growls growing louder. A loud knock echoed through the house. "Mama Beezy," the man's voice called, smooth and chilling. "I know you're in there. Open the door." Mama Beezy's grip tightened on Amaka's hand. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Kunnal's voice was steady. "We stay inside the circle. Don't let go, no matter what." The man knocked again, harder this time. "You think you can hide from me? You think you can destroy my work and walk away? Open this door, or I'll make you regret it." When no one responded, the man's tone changed. "Fine. If you won't come out, I'll come in." Suddenly, the door rattled violently, as though an unseen force was trying to break it down. The walls seemed to shake, and a cold wind blew through the room, extinguishing the lantern. But the protective circle held firm, its faint glow casting a barrier around them. "You cannot touch us," Amaka said, her voice strong. "Leave this village and never come back." The man let out a low, sinister laugh. "You think you can challenge me? You're nothing. I will destroy all of you." But despite his threats, he couldn't cross the circle. His power was no match for the combined strength of Baba Ojo's charms and their determination. Finally, with a frustrated roar, the man disappeared into the night, leaving only a cold silence behind. Kunnal, Amaka, and Mama Beezy remained in the circle, their breaths shaky but relieved. Toby let out one final growl before lying down, his tail wagging slightly as though he knew they had one. "He's gone," Kunnal said, his voice filled with relief. "We did it." Amaka nodded, though her expression remained serious. "For now, but we have to stay vigilant. He might come back." Mama Beezy wiped tears from her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for standing by me." Kunnal placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're in this together. No one faces this alone." As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, they knew their battle was far from over. But for now, they had won a small victory, and that was enough to give them hope. The morning sun spilled through the windows, bathing the small room in a warm glow. Kunnal, Amaka, and Mama Beezy sat around the table, their faces still pale from the night's events. Toby lay near the door, his head resting on his paws, his eyes darting to each of them as if sensing the tension that still hung in the air. "He's not gone for good," Amaka said quietly, breaking the silence. Her hands rested on the table, clenched into tight fists. That man will come back. He's angry now, and he'll want revenge. Kunnel nodded, his expression grim. I know. He didn't get what he wanted, and people like him don't just give up. We need to be ready for when he returns. Mama Beezy sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of the world had settled on them. What if he hurts my children? She whispered. What if he... Her voice broke, and she shook her head, unable to finish. Amaka reached across the table and placed her hand over Mama Beezy's. We won't let that happen. Your children are safe, and we're going to make sure they stay that way. But we have to act fast. We can't just wait for him to strike again. She's right, Kunnel said. We need to find him before he finds us. We need to end this once and for all. Mama Beezy's eyes widened. How can we find him? He's not like us. He has powers. How do you even fight someone like that? Kunnel and Amaka exchanged a glance. Baba Ojo might know, Amaka said. He warned us about this man and he helped us before. If anyone can guide us, it's him. Kunnel nodded. Then let's not waste time. We'll go to Baba Ojo now and see what he has to say. The three of them arrived at Baba Ojo's hut just before midday. The old man was outside, tending to a small garden of herbs. When he saw them approaching, his face grew serious. You're back, he said, straightening up. What happened last night? Did he come? Kunnel stepped forward, his voice firm. Yes, he came, but the protective circle held, and he couldn't touch us. He left, but we know he'll come back. Baba, we need your help. How do we stop him for good? Baba Ojo's expression darkened. He motioned for them to sit under the shade of a tree and took a seat himself. Stopping a man like him is no small task, he said. He's not just a spiritualist. He's a manipulator, someone who thrives on fear and control. If you want to defeat him, you have to confront him directly and break his hold on the people he's exploiting. Amaka leaned forward. How do we do that? He's powerful. He nearly broke through the circle last night. Baba Ojo nodded. Yes, but his power has limits. Much of it comes from the fear he instills in others. The more you fear him, the stronger he becomes. That's why you must face him without fear. And you must expose him for what he truly is. Once people see him for the fraud he is, his power will weaken. Kunnel frowned. Expose him? How? He's careful. He hides in the shadows. Baba Ojo stroked his beard thoughtfully. You said he's angry because you destroyed the figurine and the oil, yes? Mama Beezy nodded. Yes, he was furious. He said we'd regret it. Good, Baba Ojo said, surprising them. His anger will make him reckless. He'll come for you again, but this time you can use his anger against him. When he comes, you must challenge him publicly. Confront him in front of the village. Once the people see what he's doing, they will turn against him, and his power will crumble. Kunnel's eyes narrowed. But what if he tries to hurt someone? What if he uses his magic to scare them? Baba Ojo smiled faintly. That's why you have the charms I gave you. They will protect you and give you the strength to stand firm. Remember, fear is his weapon. If you take that away, he has nothing. The plan was set. They would wait for the man to return and confront him in the marketplace, where the entire village could see him for what he truly was. The next few days passed slowly, each one filled with a mix of nervous anticipation and quiet preparation. Kunnel and Amaka worked tirelessly to spread the word, subtly warning the villagers to gather in the market if they heard commotion. Mama Beezy spent her days with her children, holding them close and praying for strength. She knew the confrontation would be dangerous, but she also knew it was the only way to protect her family and her village. Then, on the third night, it happened. The man appeared just as the moon reached its peak, his shadowy figure cutting through the darkness like a knife. He stood outside Mama Beezy's house, his voice booming as he called out, "Mama Beezy, you thought you could defy me? You thought you could destroy my work and walk away? Come out now, or I'll tear this house apart." Kunnel, Amaka, and Mama Beezy stood inside, their hearts pounding. Kunnel glanced at Amaka and gave a small nod. It's time. They stepped outside, Toby at their heels, his low growl vibrating in the still night air. The man turned to face them, his hood falling back to reveal a gaunt, menacing face. His eyes burned with fury, and his lips curled into a sneer. "Ah, there you are," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You think you're brave, don't you? Destroying my tools, defying my will. But you're nothing. I will show you what happens to those who cross me." Cunnel took a deep breath and stepped forward. "We're not afraid of you," he said firmly. "Your time is over. We know what you've been doing, and we won't let you hurt this village anymore." The man's eyes narrowed. "And what will you do? You're just a carpenter, a nobody. You can't stop me." "I don't have to stop you," Cunnel said, his voice rising. "The truth will. You've been stealing from these people, using their fear to control them. But tonight they'll see who you really are." As if on cue, the villagers began to gather, drawn by the commotion. They stood at a distance, whispering and pointing, their curiosity piqued. The man's expression faltered as he noticed the growing crowd. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "This is between us. Send them away." Amaka stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "No, they deserve to know the truth. You've been feeding on their fear, taking their joy and ruining their lives. But your power ends tonight." The man let out a furious roar and raised his hands, chanting words in a language none of them understood. A dark wind whipped through the marketplace, sending chills down everyone's spines. But Cunnel, Amaka, and Mama Beezy stood firm, their charms glowing brightly in the moonlight. "Your magic can't hurt us," Cunnel said, his voice steady. "And it won't save you. The people see you now for what you really are. A coward hiding behind tricks and lies." The villagers murmured among themselves, their fear giving way to anger. One by one, they began to step forward, forming a circle around the man. His chants faltered as he realized he was losing control. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You don't know who you're dealing with." But the villagers didn't stop. They moved closer, their voices rising in a wave of defiance. "Leave our village. You have no power here." Overwhelmed and outnumbered, the man stumbled backward. His once commanding presence had crumbled, replaced by fear and desperation. Finally, with one last glare at Cunnel, he disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but silence behind. Cunnel turned to the crowd, his voice calm but firm. "He's gone, but we must stay united. Fear gives men like him power. If we stand together, no one can break us." The villagers cheered, their voices echoing through the night. Mama Beezy fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as her children ran to her, wrapping their arms around her tightly. Amaka placed a hand on Cunnel's shoulder. "We did it," she said softly. "The village is safe." Cunnel nodded, a small smile breaking through his tired expression. "For now, but we'll always be ready." Together, the morning after the confrontation, the village felt lighter. The air seemed fresher, and for the first time in a long while, there were smiles on the faces of the villagers. People moved about with renewed energy, greeting each other warmly as they went about their daily routines. But inside Mama Beezy's house, the mood was still tense. Cunnel, Amaka, and Mama Beezy sat around the wooden table, their faces serious. Toby lay near the door, alert as ever, his eyes flicking between them. The events of the previous night replayed in their minds like a bad dream. "Do you think he's really gone?" Mama Beezy asked, her voice shaky. She clutched a steaming cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly. Cunnel shook his head. "I don't know. Men like him don't just disappear. He's probably licking his wounds and planning his next move." Amaka nodded in agreement. "Baba Ojo said his power comes from fear and control. We've taken that away from him, but that doesn't mean he won't try to get it back. We need to be prepared." Mama Beezy's shoulders slumped. "I've caused so much trouble for this village," she whispered. "If I hadn't taken that man's offer." Cunnel leaned forward, his voice firm but kind. "Mama Beezy, this isn't your fault. He preyed on your desperation. You did what you thought you had to do to survive. Now we're fixing it together." Amaka reached out and placed a comforting hand on Mama Beezy's arm. Kunnal's right. What matters now is that we stand united. The village is strong when we work together. Mama Beezy gave a small nod, though the guilt in her eyes lingered. So what do we do next? How do we make sure he never comes back? Later that day, the trio made their way to Baba Ojo's hut. The old man was sitting outside, sorting dried herbs into small bundles. When he saw them approaching, he waved them over, his expression serious. "I've been expecting you," he said, motioning for them to sit. "You've done well to drive him away, but the fight isn't over. Men like him don't let go of their prey so easily." Kunnal nodded. "We figured as much. Baba, what do we need to do to keep the village safe? How do we stop him for good?" Baba Ojo stroked his beard, his eyes narrowing in thought. "To truly stop him, you must sever his connection to this village completely. That means breaking every tie he's established here and ensuring he has no way to return. But it won't be easy. It will require strength, courage, and unity." Amaka leaned forward, her voice steady. "We're ready. Whatever it takes, we'll do it." The old man smiled faintly. "Good. Then listen carefully. His power is tied to the fear he's sown and the charms he's left behind. If there are any remnants of his magic in the village, they must be destroyed. We must also perform a cleansing ritual to protect the village from his influence." Mama Beezy's brow furrowed. "Remnants? Do you mean there could still be charms hidden somewhere?" Baba Ojo nodded. "Yes. He may have placed objects around the village to anchor his power. We need to find them and destroy them. I'll guide you, but you must do the searching." Kunnal exchanged a glance with Amaka. "All right, where do we start?" For the next few hours, they combed through the village, guided by Baba Ojo's instructions. He taught them how to recognize signs of hidden charms, an unnatural chill in the air, strange markings, or areas where plants refused to grow. The villagers, now aware of the danger, joined in the search, their determination replacing the fear that had once gripped them. "Over here," a young boy called out, pointing to a small bundle tied to the base of a tree. Kunnal rushed over, carefully untying it. Inside were dried leaves, feathers, and a small piece of bone etched with strange symbols. Baba Ojo examined it closely, his expression grim. "This is one of his anchors," he said. "Burn it immediately." Kunnal didn't hesitate. He set the bundle on fire, watching as the flames consumed it. A faint hiss echoed through the air, and the atmosphere around them grew lighter. By nightfall, they had found and destroyed 3 more charms. Exhausted but determined, they gathered in the marketplace, where Baba Ojo prepared the cleansing ritual. The villagers formed a large circle, holding hands as Baba Ojo chanted, his voice rising and falling like a song carried on the wind. Mama Beezy stood in the center of the circle with Kunnal and Amaka, holding a small bowl filled with herbs and ash from the burned charms. At Baba Ojo's signal, she scattered the contents into the fire at the center of the circle. The flames roared to life, casting a warm, golden light over the crowd. A wave of energy rippled through the air, carrying with it a sense of peace and renewal. The villagers cheered, their voices echoing into the night. Kunnal turned to Baba Ojo, a smile breaking through his tired expression. "Is it over?" The old man nodded. "For now, the village is cleansed, and his ties to this place are broken. But remember, vigilance is key. Evil has a way of finding new paths. Stay united, and you will be strong." In the days that followed, the village began to heal. Mama Beezy's bread stall reopened, this time without the weight of dark magic. Her customers returned, not because of a spell, but because of the genuine warmth and love she poured into her work. Kunnal and Amaka continued to watch over the village, their bond with the community stronger than ever. And though the shadow of the spiritualist lingered in their minds, they knew they had faced the worst and come out stronger. Together, they had reclaimed their village, proving that even in the face of darkness, unity and courage could light the way. The sun rose slowly over the village, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. The marketplace was beginning to stir, but there was a quietness in the air that wasn't there before. It was the quietness of peace, of a village trying to rebuild itself after weeks of fear and unease. Kunnel sat on the steps of his workshop, carving a small wooden figure with careful precision. Toby lay beside him, wagging his tail lazily as villagers passed by, greeting Kunnel with warm smiles and waves. But even as he returned their greetings, Kunnel's mind was elsewhere, still turning over everything that had happened. Kunnel, Amaka's voice broke through his thoughts. She was walking toward him, carrying a basket filled with freshly baked bread from Mama Beezy's stall. "You've been sitting here for hours. What's on your mind?" Kunnel set down his carving knife and the half-finished figure. "I've been thinking," he said, rubbing his hands together. "We drove him away. But do you really think it's over? Do you think he'll leave us alone for good?" Amaka sighed and sat down beside him. "I don't know. Baba Ojo said we broke his connection to the village, but men like him, they don't give up easily. We have to stay vigilant." Kunnel nodded. "That's what I'm afraid of. What if he finds another way to get to us? What if he's out there, planning his next move?" Amaka placed a hand on his arm, her touch steadying. "Then we'll be ready. Kunnel, look around you. The village is strong again because of what we did. The people aren't afraid anymore. He'll find it much harder to break us now." Kunnel looked at her, his expression softening. "You're right, but we can't let our guard down." Amaka smiled faintly. "We won't. And if he does come back, he'll find that we're stronger than ever." Later that day, they met at Mama Beezy's house to check in on her and her children. The small home was filled with the warm, comforting smell of bread baking in the oven. Mama Beezy greeted them with a smile, her face brighter than it had been in weeks. "Ah, Kunnel, Amaka," she said, ushering them inside. Come in, come in. I just took some bread out of the oven. Please have some." They sat down at the wooden table, and Mama Beezy placed a plate of steaming bread in front of them. Her children, who had been playing in the corner, ran over to greet them, their laughter filling the room. "How are you feeling, Mama Beezy?" Amaka asked, breaking off a piece of bread. Mama Beezy sighed, her smile fading slightly. "Better, thanks to you both. But I still think about him. About what he might do if he comes back." Kunnel leaned forward, his tone reassuring. "You don't have to worry, Mama Beezy. Baba Ojo said his power here is broken. As long as we stick together and stay strong, he won't be able to harm us." Mama Beezy nodded, though the worry in her eyes didn't completely disappear. "I just want my children to be safe. That's all I've ever wanted." Amaka reached out and took Mama Beezy's hand. "They are safe, and they have a strong mother who's willing to do whatever it takes to protect them. That's what matters." Mama Beezy smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, both of you. I don't know what I would have done without you." As the sun began to set, Kunnel and Amaka returned to the marketplace, where the villagers were gathering for an impromptu celebration. It had been weeks since the village felt like this, alive, joyful, and united. A small group of musicians played lively tunes, and children danced in the open square, their laughter echoing in the evening air. Kunnel and Amaka stood near the edge of the crowd, watching with smiles on their faces. Toby barked happily, running in circles around the children. "We did this," Kunnel said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of pride and relief. "We gave them their lives back." Amaka nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Yes, we did. But it wasn't just us. The whole village came together to fight. That's what made the difference." Kunnel glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You always know the right thing to say." Amaka laughed softly. "Someone has to keep you grounded." As they stood there, enjoying the moment, a familiar figure approached them. Baba Ojo, leaning slightly on his walking stick, joined them at the edge of the square. "Ah, my brave ones," he said, his voice warm. "It's good to see the village like this again. You've done well." Kunnel shook his head. "We couldn't have done it without you, Baba. Your guidance saved us." Baba Ojo chuckled. "I only showed you the path. You're the ones who had the courage to walk it. That's something no one can take away from you." Amaka smiled. "Thank you, Baba. But do you think we'll ever see him again?" The old man's expression grew serious. "Men like him don't give up easily. But if he does return, he'll find that this village is no longer a place for him. You've made sure of that. Kunal nodded, his resolve strengthening. We'll be ready, no matter what. As the celebration continued, Kunal, Amaka, and Baba Ojo watched from the sidelines, their hearts full. The village was healing, and though the road ahead might still hold challenges, they knew they had the strength to face them together. The sounds of laughter and music filled the air, a testament to the resilience of a community that had found its way back to the light. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Kunal felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. Whatever came next, they would face it, together,